We are so honored to welcome Simon Van Boy, the author of 13 books, including Love Begins in Winter, winner of the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, and Everything Beautiful Began After, as well as The Illusion of Separateness, which together with Sharon Nagel, we sold over 400 copies at Boswell, and we continue to have customers coming back telling us how much they loved it. And Boy has written for the New York Times, NPR, and the BBC, and attended, oh, I don't even want to say that you attended college on a football scholarship because I was going to ask you about it. So I'll move right on to Sharon Nagel. Former Boswell and Schwartz bookseller Sharon Nagel is a librarian at the Whitefish Bay Library. And I should also note that the first book in the Shady Hollow series, written with Jocelyn Cole under the name Juno Black, comes out from them. I hope I get this right. Correct me. Anchor imprint of Penguin Random House Inn. It's not lined yet, so I think it's February. Is that right?
January 25th.
Okay. So meteorological February. Thank you both.
So many days.
We're very excited, as you can imagine. We both love Night Came with Many Stars so much. And we're so glad that you're back with a beautiful book. And we would love to have you start by saying a few words and maybe reading a little bit of this special book. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. And thank you, Scott and Sharon and Daniel, for organizing this. I appreciate it. I was thinking, marijuana was just legalized, I think, in New York. And so these sort of dispensaries are going to be opening up. And I thought, well, Daniel kind of runs a dispensary, and Sharon and Scott, because libraries and bookstores, they could get books in people's hands. And I don't know if you've had the experience where you've read a book and you've thought, oh my God, and it's changed your life or it's revealed something about yourself. But books, I think, are a kind of medicine as well. So this is like my favorite dispensary in America. Boswell books. Anyway, so let's see. You need to get like a sort of strange symbol outside. So let me read a little bit from the book, from our book. And let's see. Okay, I think I'm going to go in at page 152, the Heather chapter, just to give you a sense of the tone and the style. Just so you may not like it. So let's have a look. Okay. Heather, 1999. An hour before closing, the restaurant was already empty. Heather went from table to table, turning over clean coffee cups one by one, then laying down paper placemats. When that was done, she sat at the counter and wrapped silverware in paper napkins, fastening each bundle with a sticker. Her feet hurt, but she'd soon be in the car going home. She could take her shoes off then and drive barefoot through the darkness. It was Halloween night, and the dining room was decorated with ghosts, ghouls, and witches' hats. Alone with empty tables, Heather wondered if there were real ghosts and if they watched people. She once found an envelope when cleaning out a cupboard in the supply closet. It was a pack of photographs from New Year's Eve, 1957. When she saw the people in those pictures, Heather knew their lives had come and gone. Those who had lived out their days in the town would now be in the cemetery with tiny snapping American flags in the ground over where they were buried. The waitresses in the photographs had matching green dresses. The men wore dark suits or overalls, carried burning cigarettes. Many years ago, there had been a factory nearby and the town was prosperous. Heather wondered if the people in the pictures sensed their time of abundance would pass, or did every day seem new and unbreakable? The hardest thing about getting old, a customer once warned her, was always being shocked by the face staring back at you in the mirror. When Marvin appeared from the kitchen, he was wearing a satin Louisville Cardinals jacket over his baggy kitchen whites. He was a tall, deliberate man with a slow but confident way of speaking. He carried several white containers in a plastic bag, most likely French fries for his children. In his other hand was a box of menthol cigarettes and a plastic lighter held together with a rubber band. I'm taking off, Heather. I closed the kitchen and left a piece of Salisbury steak in foil for your mama. You're a sweetheart, Marvin. I love you. Okay, don't forget it now. I won't. Happy Halloween. If Clyde sees it, then I know, Marvin, I won't forget. I promise. How's she doing anyway? Mama? She's okay. She misses him. We all do. The cook turned to go. Want me to flip the sign on the door? No need. I'm right behind you. But there were still so many things to do. And the sudden quiet was strange and penetrating, as though in the absence of people, Heather felt them more. She climbed onto a stool and held open the pie cabinet's plastic door with her elbow, sweeping crumbs from the clear shelves. Heather felt she had learned a lot from being a waitress. There were regulars she knew by name, others by face. Some of the old ladies couldn't eat without shaking and making a mess. The other waitresses made fun, but Heather knew coming to Booth's Diner was all they had left. Some of the ladies spent hours getting ready, pasting on makeup, choosing what to wear. Heather guessed it was too hard being at home. The rooms once full of people were now full of voices, calling to them from far away. So I think I'm going to stop reading there. I've embarrassed myself enough.
I think Sharon's coming back too.
Oh, yes,
Sharon's back. And Sharon, I would love to see you asking the first question.
Oh, okay. I'm still processing I thought the accents were good. I went to high school in the South in North Florida, and my accent comes and goes depending on who I'm speaking with. So I thought it was good.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you, I know that you spent some time in Kentucky. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up there?
Yeah, I'd always wanted to move to the United States, and I don't really know why. It's a sort of a family mystery. But after I was old, and when I was old enough to speak, I just was obsessed with the USA. And every Christmas, my parents would buy, a book about a city, or posters all. So if there's such a thing as reincarnation, then there's a good chance that I was an American somehow before I was this, what you see before you now, and that I wanted to come back. And then as soon as I turned 18, I moved here permanently. And I did that by going to university in Kentucky. I used to play rugby. That was going to be my job, hopefully. And I got recruited to play American football, to be a third string running back. So the coaches were planning ahead. And it was a really good opportunity. I met a lot of nice people, and, football teams are very diverse, and it was great. People were incredibly kindest people. I've traveled a bit now since, in the last, 40 odd years, but Kentucky remains the place where I've met hands down the kindest people. They literally would give you the shirt off their backs, literally. So that's how I came to be in Kentucky, is trying to play American football, but realizing the only way I could really succeed was to actually run through people's legs, because I'm quite small. If you actually see me,
I was gonna ask you how you got her. You didn't seem like a typical football player, so you must have been just spectacular in rugby.
Well, and also in the showers, there wasn't enough space on the communal shelf for all my products. So that was a bit of an issue as well. But it wasn't like halftime, a cup of tea and a couple of sugars and maybe a biscuit. It was full on, like people running out, giving you massages. It's taken very seriously.
Yeah, they play rugby in Milwaukee, or they used to. I haven't seen it lately, but they used to play along the lake. There was a league, and I don't think I'd ever really seen it anywhere else, but you would have, had I known, I would have said when you visited us years ago, well, like, let's go see rugby. But
Yeah, we could have.
maybe you're like, yeah, I've seen enough rugby for my life. How long is this idea of writing this novel, which is very much a celebration of Kentucky in a lot of ways? Like how long was that just, whatever. How long was it simmering inside of you, waiting to come out?
Well, it was one of those stories that, early on I wanted to tell, but I didn't have the skill. Because, being a writer is part emotional and intuitive. And that's why, somebody with no formal education, can be an amazing poet or a writer because they're doing it on instinct. People will use words in a sentence and it's used correctly, but they don't know what the actual words mean. But they're building language contextually. And there's people out there who can do that. And with a bit of training and a bit of, guidance and mentorship, those people can become brilliant writers. When I got to know a family very well living in rural Kentucky, and I remember once I was having breakfast with the real Alfreda, who is alive and well now, living in Grayson County, Kentucky, and she said, I was asking about, how did you grow up, Alfreda? What was your girlhood like, your childhood? And she said, well, she said, I didn't particularly like my daddy. And I was like, really? She said, yeah, he said he was a pretty bad man. And I was like, maybe he drank too much, or like maybe he came home late from work. And then she said, I don't know how many people he killed exactly, and I was like, okay, here we have, that's very interesting. And I didn't consider myself a writer at that point. I was pre-med and I was just started taking art and English classes. And pretty soon I thought, I don't care if I have to live in a shed. I want to be an artist, a painter or a writer. There's nothing else I really want to do with my life. So it's what every parent wants to hear their child say, isn't it? So I kept the story, and over the years I'd visit Kentucky, and Alfreda and Sam and Uncle Rusty, they tell me more stories, He came up from his basement room and showed me a pair of tiny shoes, and he just put them in front of me right next to my plate and said, Simon, these are my first shoes. And I thought, great, because they're going to go into the book as soon as I've got the skills to write it. And then my brilliant editor, Joshua Boswell at Goldin, he sent me Kent Harriff's trilogy. It starts with Plain Song. And after I read that, I realized this is the structure. This is the structure of like these sort of bizarre vignettes that sort of link together, these floating paragraphs. And I thought, that's it. That's the structure I can use. So, you learn to be a writer from other writers, really. So thanks, Kent.
And he's looking down and saying you're welcome. So I'm sure he'd be grateful for all the writers that he helped. So it's interesting. I usually have people start with like because I realized we just dove into this and everybody's like, I don't know what the heck anyone's talking about. Would you like take, we call it sometimes an elevator pitch, give folks like just a couple of paragraphs about what is exactly the structure of the book without,
Okay, so the book follows a family in Kentucky from about 1910 to about 2010. And it's about 5, maybe verging on 6 generations of people. And I had a lot of it is based on stories I was told by a particular family in Kentucky, by other people I knew in Kentucky. And then there were all these gaps. And so, I didn't call it a memoir because of the gaps. And because, if somebody remembers something and tells you, in a way, that's kind of a fiction too, even though it's how they remember. So I didn't want to go through that minefield of like proving memoir. So I just thought I'll do it as a novel, and then I could take creative license with the gaps. So linking the true stories to form like an overall narrative, that was quite difficult. By that I mean I was just rolling around on the floor screaming, and then you'd see me at Taco Bell just crying. So the book follows the family over about 100 years, starting with the sale of a 13-year-old girl into marriage by her father to pay off his gambling debt, which is a true story. And then there's other, when I was, over the years I talked to Alfreda, she'd say, her father was adopted and raised by a black family, even though technically it was illegal in Kentucky at that time, but so somebody who read it, an early reader, said that couldn't possibly be true. And I'm like, it is, and he was committed to civil rights his whole life because, so this family, they just saw an orphan child and they thought, let's take him in, we'll raise him, we'll take a risk. So that's in the book too. So, I would challenge you to find the bits that you think are made up and the bits that are true.
Sharon, do you want to take the challenge?
I do not. Not yet.
Okay, good.
And I realized that you have also answered a bunch of my questions.
Oh no!
Oh no, I know. Except, let's see. I do want to. You've answered this, but I was going to ask you if you were a pantser or a plotter. But it seems that you are definitely a plotter for years and years and years before you write. So that
is that the normal way that you go?
No, actually, it's a good question, Sharon, because it depends on the book. Like any of you out there who have had multiple children, or whether you've adopted them or they've adopted you, or you've had them visit, because anyone out there who has young people in their life, you'll know that they're all different. And the parenting style has to change a bit with each individual. So it's like that with books too. Each book has its own very own personality. And sometimes the book does not want me to even think about what's going to happen. It just wants me to basically just jog on the edge of this cliff, and then other books just have to be plotted out early on, chapter by chapter, before I even start. So it really, really depends on the book.
I'm curious as to what, how, because I remember Illusion also came out of a real story, in terms of the genesis, but this seems like much more real story, many real stories put together. Did I catch that right? I just want to make sure the audience of it, you really actually had thought about doing this book as a nonfiction, family history or something? Or was that just for an hour?
Yeah, I mean, well, when I first heard this whole story, I was 18, and I was like, like any 18-year-old, oh, it's good. Oh, okay. Oh, and one other drink. I was an 18-year-old, so it just went into my mind. And then, at Campbellsville University, where I was lucky enough to get a scholarship, I took really good classes. With amazing teachers, I think much better than if I'd stayed in the UK, because the teachers there were very passionate, and they'd sit and have coffee with you. It's like they had nothing else to do. They just really liked being with students, and it was my first experience, one of my first experiences of having good teachers, people who authentically cared. And I would have stayed at the university, but it was Christian in a way that I wasn't, and it was a bit awkward. So. A bit evangelical for me, but I mean, a lovely place and very kind people, but we weren't a good fit for me at that age. So I ended up leaving after a couple of years, but it's still a very, very good school, I think. And so the teachers turned me on to writing and art, and they gave me confidence in my own work. And so I really owe them a lot.
Wow. We already had a question from somebody saying, who read the book, and without giving too much away, are there any other, the two stories that you said are true are kind of the craziest, I can't believe this happened parts of the book. Do you have anything, would you like to share maybe one more? like
Oh, that is
outrageous
true.
things? Hmm?
That is true.
That
Or
is
isn't
true.
true.
Oh, I guess either way. You could make us guess.
Okay. The character Sam, who is called Sam in real life, he did roll his car into a river. That's true.
Hmm. So how did these characters, oh, Sharon, do you want to ask the question, or I can ask it later, but I'm just curious, like you used some real names. Did you then get have each person kind of sign off, and did they get to read it ahead of time? Like how did that go?
No, I probably should have.
Oh,
Are they just finding out?
They are, yeah. But I didn't use any real last names. I just used real first names. And I think that the family, who I'm still very close to and hopefully will be as long as I live, they didn't read the book until it was actually out publicly. So I was a bit nervous because the real Sam said to me that he had to keep putting the book down because there were so many emotional moments of his life, like when his eye got injured. And he said that, and being in the hospital. And there were some strange things too, like Eddie is made up. He's the only character who's made up. And Sam said that his best friend growing up was called Eddie, and he was from a broken home. And I had no idea about that. So that's a bizarre, coincidence.
you mean you just guessed it who his friend was? Wow. Okay. Well, there's a magical property to writing, I guess.
Well, there was somebody I knew who lived in a trailer park in Iowa that I am friends with, or was friends with when I was living out in the Midwest. And his name was Eddie. And I thought, well, I'll call this character Eddie because after this guy. And then I thought, he'll never read it. But lo and behold, a week after it's published, he's like talking about the book. So on social media. So
there we are.
Wow.
Sharon, what's your next one?
I think we've gone through. I'm gonna let you go back on your list.
Okay. Well, I wanted to know, you really do infuse such grace in the characters. Like even there's almost no character. Like I can say, like if you had fictionalized, like I would have faith in you if you fictionalized me, even if I had told you all the bad things I did, just because you really give people this sort of special quality, except for one character, Carol's daddy, who doesn't even get a name. What was it? It almost feels to me, having read so many of your books, that it might have pained you a bit to write a character so evil. Was it a different experience for you to do that? And what was it like writing him?
That's a really good question. By the way, I'd love to know the bad things you've done, Daniel.
Yeah, not yet.
I'm up for that.
I mean, feel free to put
and I could collaborate on a book.
I'll tell you a story in a second that I can get away with it. It's not a bad thing, but it's an awareness of bad things.
If Santa doesn't come this year, Daniel, you'll know why. So let's see. Oh yeah, Carol's father is a pretty awful person. I've written awful people before. There was a Nazi soldier in The Illusion of Separateness, but at least I show how he became like that. Going back
That's right, and there's no real background to, like, this guy is just instant evil.
Yeah, he's a bit of an archetype actually, and that's one of I criticize my books quite a lot because there's things I look back on and say, oh, I wouldn't do that now. But of course, there's never a perfect book. You just keep working with the tools you have, and then other problems arise. It's quite nice, but it's like working with wood because wood's always changing. It's like a living thing. So yeah, he's a bit of an archetype. I think I would slightly humanize him more if I did it again, but it wasn't hard writing him because I knew I was going to kill him. That sounds weird, right? Isn't it? But he had to die because he doesn't belong in a story that's dominated by forgiveness and compassion. And I think Carol says it perfectly. She says, I was the only person in the whole world who was prepared to love him. And he couldn't see that. The only person. And he couldn't see it. So he was beyond redemption. I think some people are, I'm so sorry to say, I think some people get to a point where they're beyond redemption. And usually those people don't want redemption either. So, I mean, you know, in the book, I had to draw a hard line. And what better than a soldier who just looked at the face of evil, you know, in World War II? What better than a soldier from that conflict to now take care of an evil person like this in his own backyard? But of course, the Greeks didn't believe that people were born evil. They believed that people became evil because of things that happened to them. And I'm inclined more to that belief, you know, not the Damien the Omen evil babies, but that people, you know, through what happens to them, suffering, so that people like Carol's daddy are sort of, they were at one point victims themselves. So maybe that would be another book, but it wouldn't be a book I'd like to write.
Yeah, you know, yes, you can see you can imagine that this person had a pretty miserable childhood. So you wouldn't write it, huh?
Yeah.
No. I love the idea.
Because it's too, you know, I have to,
yeah.
well, after writing a book like that, every time I sit down and write, I have to go to the gym and lift weights. And it, you know, when you write a book about a violent character, you know, chemicals surge because you're dealing with this real person. And so it's quite stressful, actually. You know, I listen to a lot of violent music. Well, violent for me, which would be, you know, Prokofiev or you know, certain sections of Rachmaninoff. But, you know, the Montagues and the Capulets, I listened to that hundreds of times. You know, the Romeo and Juliet, the piece from Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, so I listened to that. And also, I was inspired with his character by Caravaggio. Was that Caravaggio? He was the insane one who like knifed people. He was a brilliant painter. Is that the person? Am I thinking of the right person?
Do you know your killer painters, Sharon? I don't.
Caravaggio was the one who Medusa's head. He
okay.
Medusa's head. I don't know about him knifing people though. They didn't tell us that when I was in Florence.
I didn't even go to Florence, so I get that. Yeah. I'm just curious about the telling. So how many different people in Kentucky kind of told you their stories? And do you have like a little booth that says, you know, tell me your story 5 cents, like Lucy and Peanuts or something? Because it just feels like so many of your stories do come out of these, of people sort of laying bare their secret lives. So
well, if I did charge 5 cents, I'd probably have about $1.85.
Oh yeah. Well, inflation, you know, that's from that cartoon's from the 50s.
So yeah, I love that cartoon though. But a lot of people, I mean, you know, because I don't know why people tell me their stories, but they do. I quite like it. You know, I was sitting on a Greyhound bus 20 years ago, and a guy got on and just decided to sit next to me. And he looked at me and smiled and said, I just got out of prison. And I was like, oh, well, it's nice you're on the bus then. You know, and then he started talking to me about his history in Laredo, Texas. And I had his whole life story, you know, and I don't know. I'm not a particularly judgmental person because, you know, early on, you realize that judgment hinges on the idea that if you were in somebody else's shoes, you would make a different decision. But as it's impossible to know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, therefore judgment is in many ways impossible. Justice is possible, but I think judgment is impossible, paradoxically.
I'm just gonna tell you, I'm not gonna tell you anything I did, but I saved letters from people from like my childhood, high school, college, and like not just my family, but I was, you know, in the days before the internet, you wrote to, well, not you, but maybe you, like a certain kind of person would write to lots of people, and I have all these letters back. And I kept one letter that's like, you're such an awful person, and you did this and this and this and this, and I was like, well, why did I keep this letter for 40 years? I'd be so much happier not knowing. But apparently I called, it had to do with, it's just stupid. We'd had a falling out and I called and I wasn't suitably apologetic, you know. So I ain't telling you any more than that.
It wasn't your
Um,
fault.
I'm shocked.
It wasn't your fault, Daniel.
But don't hang on to a letter like that. That's just my piece of advice for everybody. Get rid of it.
No.
Burn it.
I burn.
Right,
I have
that's
it.
what the Buddhists say about thoughts, about destructive thoughts that we have, about ourselves or about others. They say that the Buddhists, I was reading it somewhere, that if you're walking down a path and you see a snake coming towards you, the snake wants to bite you, like a destructive thought. You don't just stand there and let it bite you. You go around it, or you just avoid it, or you take a stick and you gently fling it to the side. So I always liked that advice about, just because I have what's considered to be, I have obsessive compulsive tendencies. So when I have a thought, sometimes it just, it's like mice. One thought becomes 100 within a short time. And so that advice always helped me, about if you see a snake, just go in a different direction. So.
Fortunately, our memories help too, because they tend to not erase every bad thought, but more than, when you think about it. If you can, when you get a letter like that and you say, I don't remember this happening at all.
Yeah, it's true. It's like memory comes with a pina colada.
Let's segue with that, because I was going to ask you about themes of alcoholism, and is it, if I could, your own recovery? If you are, I don't know if you're okay with speaking about that or not.
Yeah, I'll speak about anything.
Okay.
But I'll be honest, it sometimes is offensive, but still, it's better to be upfront. Yeah, I stopped drinking in '99, so that's and I wouldn't have had. I'm enjoying life, and I put husbanding and fathering ahead of everything. Writing, writing comes third or fourth. But I wouldn't have been able to do anything properly if I'd kept drinking. Some people can have a couple of beers, or they can have a glass of wine or a cocktail. My wife, for instance, makes a nice glass of Saint Emilion, which I can appreciate. But for some people, it's like drinking is like having Cheetos. It starts with one, and then you look and the bag's empty. So for me, it was just. Once I had a taste of it, I had an endless appetite for it. That would just seem never to be satiated. That was Grendel, but what's Grendel's mother? That's the real question. So I'm happy without it. I think Nietzsche, a lot of my heroes, Nietzsche, oh God, I've forgotten who else. Someone interesting.
And the others, you say.
Yeah, the others, et al. They stay away from it too. But for some people, it's nice. They enjoy. It's a food to the French, a food. So that's good.
It's a very powerful part of this story, that people are struggling and overcome it. Do you have any other? I mean, the book I read recently that really captured it well was Shuggie Bain, Booker winner. That is just a devastating story.
I bought that for my husband.
Yeah, I'm in touch with the author. I'm actually in touch with the author, and we talk about, through social media, we talk about childhood, because I know all the places and the different supermarkets and so he's a fantastic guy. You should. I don't know if he's been to the shop yet, but he's really, really great, really lovely man.
Yeah.
And that book also, I think, it's highly recommended. Shuggie Bain, highly recommended.
Yeah, I hope a lot of us have read it already, but not everybody. And I think people are intimidated because it is not the shortest book in the world, but it is worth every word. It's just such a beautiful, heartbreaking story, and I just love. It was supposedly a pretty quiet book in hardcover, and it's just, and then it got both the Booker winner and National Book Award shortlist. So I'm going to mention that. Yeah. I will mention, if you like writers who write about sobriety, then one of my favorite novelists, all her books are themed that way. You've probably read her, Michelle Hunavin. You ever heard of her? She,
I've heard of her, but I haven't read her work.
Yeah, finished her first, I had read James Land is one of my favorite novels of all time. And then I read her other books as they came out. And then I just went and read, I think it's called Red Rock, which is about a sobriety community in this small town. And it's just, it was terrific. So they're hard to get, hasn't really exploded, but I bet she has another book in her, so maybe no. Do you have another? Oh, tell us all a little about how, you talked about planning this book out, but tell me, somebody at another event talked about not planning and pantsing, but like how you kind of build on a story. You always have so many, whether it's a collection of short stories or a novel, there are a lot of stories telling and stories going on. How do you build and connect the stories? Do you write the stories and then connect them? Or are they going in order? Like, does one lead to another? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's really just chaos. And sometimes I write one and hope I can link it to something. And then sometimes I write plans for them. It really depends on the book. So for instance, somebody told me a story about how he left. His father was in the military in South America, in a country in South America. And he always wanted his only son to also join the military. But the only son didn't think the military was a good idea in that particular country. And the father had been through conflicts and was a veteran. And so anyway, the son leaves home, like 18 or 19. But at some point while he's away, he came to America, I think. And, there was some hardship in his family back home and they didn't have any money. And so the work he did in America and putting himself through school, he would send money back to the country. And he was basically supporting his mother, his father, his grandparents, this like 20-year-old kid. And I met him, he was one of my students at a university where I was teaching. And so anyway, eventually after like 5 or 6 years, he decided to go back to visit. And his father hadn't spoken to him this whole time because apparently he thought he was holding a grudge about him not joining the army. But when he got to the airport, his father was in full military uniform. And as he came out from the customs, the father saluted and there were tears running down his face. And I thought that is a really, really good story.
And which book is it in now?
No, I haven't written it yet. No one's seen it. Actually, you can if you want.
Writing this down.
Don't worry about me. There ain't no books coming out of this one. So
I write about animals, so
animal crimes.
Yes, murder amongst woodland creatures.
So somebody said, we have been talking about your writing, and somebody said, ask him more about his writing process. I'm like, well, I think it was summed up in chaos. But would you like to elaborate on the term chaos?
Yeah, so Mary, if you also write, then you'll know that everything feels completely wrong or like it's not going to work for quite a long time while you're writing. It's like you're channeling the story from the universe. And those stories feel a bit strange, but at least there'll be some days in that process where it feels like nothing's going well. And Michael Cunningham once said that he just clocks in and clocks out because some days are so bad, that they're just, can you keep going? But he said when he flicks through his books, he can't tell the good days from the bad days. So it's a matter, I think, of just putting the time in and just trying to live with the fact that it's all going to feel weird and uncomfortable and chaotic until until you're close to finishing. So people often say, I want to write, but I don't know what to write about. But often if you start writing, what you are going to write about will reveal itself to you. So it's like running. Some people hate running, but when they actually are running, it feels quite nice. You know, nobody wants to do the washing up, but once you're there with your hands in the warm water and like little bubbles and soap, it's actually quite pleasant. So once you start writing, things often happen, but it's a matter of just being comfortable and having faith that your story or your book is going to be really, really good. But it's not going to feel good for a long time. It's going to feel like you are just flicking back an oncoming tide.
So don't give up hope.
No, I mean, the fact you have to be, I mean, being a writer is like you're struggling. It's like wrestling this unruly beast to the ground. But it wants to be wrestled to the ground. And you just have to try all these different techniques, and some days are better than others. And then when you finally get it perfect, you have to say goodbye when you finally get it right. But it's like if you were an interior decorator, but you had to also build the house. Building the house is not fun. You know, it's messy and there's shavings and empty cans of iced tea, you know, and all these things that you see on a building lot. And by the time the house is ready to be decorated, interior, you know, the interior, you've been through most of the process. So I think for me, writing is like that. I've got to get through all this umfgar, you know, framing and plumbing and electricity before I can get to the part that feels really good, which is like hanging the pictures, you know, putting the TV there instead of there.
Sharon, do you have one, or do you want me to ask another?
I think I'm you
Okay.
go ahead.
You interrupt me when you hear something good. Think of something good.
Okay.
Or
Yeah,
I wanted to say something about the generations. Like this book is really stretched out over a number of generations. And I was just curious as to what you wanted to say about that. Like what is your philosophy of generational stories? Like where were you coming from when you were thinking about that? Why'd you write it?
It's really amazing how you know, I think in the Jewish Torah, which I believe is the Christian Old Testament, or the first 5 books of it, you know, there's an idea that the children will suffer for the sins of the parent. I mean, they say father, but everything's so patriarchal then. You know, I think it means parents in general.
We can do a new translation.
Yeah, great. But certainly that's true in this book. For instance, when Carol gets rescued by that Cherokee, Old Man Walker, he gives her the money that he's won from Carol's father gambling. And she says, "Why are you giving me all this money?" And he says, "What you give in this world will be given back to you. And what you take will be taken from you." And that's his sort of motto, you know, that's the words he lives by. And anyway, generations later, for the reader who's really astute or reading it in the morning instead of the evening, Eddie's last name is Eddie Walker. So Old Man Walker is Eddie's great-great-grandfather. And so there's a scene where Sam takes some money that he's won gambling to Eddie, who's living in a trailer and having hard times, and he gives him half of his winnings, not realizing that he's fulfilling the prophecy of Eddie's great-great-grandfather, that what you give will be given back to you. So sometimes it takes a couple of generations for that kind of karma to come full circle.
So it needed this sort of grand scale to really provide that philosophy. One of the things that I've been saying about the book is there's been a wave of these philosophical novels, most notably The Midnight Library, The Boy, the Horse, you know, which is, they say is nonfiction, but to me, it's a graphic novel. A few others as Sharon has heard me yap on about, Leonard and Hungry Paul, which is one of my favorites. Yes, well, sometimes people can just hear it and say, "Oh."
I will get it.
We've had great success, and I feel like your book sort of ties into it in that it is so infused with wisdom, but that doesn't really. But it's also such good storytelling, and I think that's something that a lot of our customers, and I think readers in general, are really searching for. So do you do it on purpose, or do you think that's just naturally you? Do you like? Do you
No,
think you could write a book that
I wish
wasn't
it
like
was.
that?
I wish it was naturally me. I wish it was. It's all on purpose, and that's really what takes the time. Because for me, boredom is the enemy. If somebody picks up my book and in 5 or 6 pages they're bored, then I've failed.
Yeah.
I think that even though I'm writing in the genre of literary fiction, you know, if a reader's going to give up 8 to 10 hours of their life, I really have to make that worthwhile for them. So I really feel a great responsibility to my readers to make the book good, so that when they close it, they're like, whoa, you know, I want them to have that feeling. And if they don't, then, I don't, you know, so I want to give something to my reader. I want to give them this experience, because of course, when you read, you know, if I say the snowy driveway, everyone listening now imagines a driveway from their memory, you know, a driveway that they've seen or been on or seen on television. You can't imagine something you don't have context for through experience, even if that experience is through a book or something or a picture. So when people read, they are essentially constructing the story from their own experience of life, their own experience of things. And so, you know, I'm very conscious of that when I'm writing, because this is essentially the reader's story that they have forgotten or they didn't know. It's the life they didn't live. You see what I mean? So I think that the reader will always find themselves emotionally in my books. I want them to. So, you know, some people write fiction that's escapist, and some of it's quite good, you know.
Let's see if it comes back.
Oh, yeah, he blows up.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Let's see.
Simon, we lost you.
He may hear, well, he probably doesn't hear us. Oh, you're back. Hi.
Oh, yeah, we lost you
Froze for a
minute.
little sec.
Oh, it's very cold here in this apartment. Yeah, I was saying that, you know, whereas some books are escapist, where you escape life reading it, this book is the opposite of that. I want to give readers a deeper experience of life. You know, I want them to always find themselves emotionally in my books, because, you know, I don't care if I have 10 readers. I want my readers to have an emotional experience reading my books. And not everybody wants to have an emotional experience. Some people want to get away from emotional experiences. So, you know, this book isn't going to be for everybody, you know, so, and that's okay.
That's okay.
But I hope the readers who do like it really like it. It means a lot to me. I serve my reader.
Well, I will say, as a reader, I can appreciate beautiful writing, which you provide, but to me, story is paramount, and that's what keeps me going. I want the plot. I want to know what's happening. And also, as Daniel and I have both read many, many, many books that we don't always remember, but I also remember the reaction, the emotional connection that I feel to the story. And that's the part that I remember. That's what we loved about Illusion of Separateness.
Yeah,
Nice.
thanks. It reminds me that Maya Angelou said that people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. And that's
Precisely.
certainly true, yeah. That's certainly what I want to do with my books. There's a lot of good stuff on Netflix and Amazon on TV, but how much of it is memorable, you know?
True.
We have a couple of questions from a few ex-Milwaukeeans. Steph said that your books take place in so many fabulous places. Are they always places that you've been to? And do you, if they're in your past, do you revisit them, or are they in memory, or are they made up? Obviously, we know you've been to Kentucky a lot. Did you actually, though, travel to Kentucky for the book, or was it writing and being there? You know, like, were they not connected?
Well, after I started writing, I did go there a few times, you know, to specifically look for places and take a lot of photographs, you know, looking for sets. And I have some of those photographs that I printed out, you know, of like Bessie and Martha's broken down mansion. You know, I found a place like that I wanted to set it, because the thing is, I need to know how it smells outside. I need to know how the ground feels. I need to know what it looks like in the evening at dusk. are there whippoorwills? Are there insects? Like, so it's very important to me that I get the place for me is also a character. So that's a good question. Yeah, I do try and go to the places.
Because some of your stories especially have some pretty exotic places. So, but you've generally been there. You're a world traveler. I'm not.
Well, my daughter said, like, why can't you sort of, I like to choose places that have been ignored by other writers. I would not feel there's any value. So like the suburbs of Long Island or New Jersey, like there's real stories there. So I've always chosen places that have been traditionally unpopular with readers well, maybe not readers, but certainly critics of literary fiction.
Yeah. I've read some really good Long Island stories. Alice McDermott sets a lot of her stuff there. I think Alice Hoffman said at least one or two of her books.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Stacy Williams, a former colleague, and
Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Stacy. Your books are so full of richly drawn characters whose experiences are deeply felt by readers, and clearly they come from your ability to observe and connect people's stories and emotional selves. How does the discovery of an act of writing, the exterior places and settings, differ from that, if it does at all?
That's very interesting. The exterior setting has to also be I have to feel emotionally connected to it. Now I'll give you an example. It's such a good question. I'm working on a book now that's set in a small house in England, that the character in this book moves to this house after living abroad for 55 years. And she moves back to the town where she grew up in England. And she moves into this little house she buys, a house that she cycled past as a little girl, a house that she would have seen many times as a child, not realizing that she would come here to close her life in a perfect circle. And so when I was a child in that English town, there was a particular house on a particular street, not a very nice house, just a regular house, a terraced, a 2-bedroom house that was popular with elderly people, inexpensive. But there was a particular house that just I felt drawn to. Isn't that weird? We feel these weird emotional connections to things which seem random, like something weird is going on. It's something very strange is going on in this world. That we're on the cusp. I don't know. It feels like you're walking around a corner that doesn't end. You're always on the verge of understanding. So I have an emotional connection to that weird little house in England. I look it up on Google Maps sometimes. I fantasize about buying it, but houses in the UK are very expensive right now. But so the house is, so the book is set in that house because I have an emotional connection to that house. And so I think it's having an emotional connection to setting, I think, is what allows it to become a character, in and of itself.
I have one more question for you, which is, I told Sharon I would ask this. So you are so good at characters. Your characters are so wonderful. Is there somebody who you liked, maybe a side character, who you liked so much that you thought, I could write a whole book about this person? Or anybody?
Yeah, it happens all the time, actually. I'm only with them for the weekend,
Right.
But there's a character from The Illusion of Separateness, the film director, who lives with his husband in Los Angeles, and they have a little dog and a white Mercedes, and he's just a kind person who also happens to be a very good film director. And I'd love to write a book about him.
Yeah. How about in this book? Anybody in this book?
In this book, I think Uncle Rusty would be good.
Oh, yeah. Tell him, say a few words about Uncle Rusty before we go, since we all like Uncle Rusty.
Uncle Rusty has lived with his he's lived with his sister, Alfreda, for his entire life, and he's in his 70s now, and he has a learning disability which may or may not be autism. The reason I think it's autism is because if you ask him if you say March the 12th, 1977, he will tell you exactly what the weather was on that day. He's also able to count things, objects, and he had a job as putting spokes into bicycle rims, and he could do it so quickly. He also had another job untangling chains, because he could just look at it and know how to untangle it. That's what makes me think it's autism. But he's really one of my favorite people in the world, and he's a real person.
Wow.
He's no longer collecting Coca-Cola. Now he's into the color purple, the color, not the movie or the book. And he only wears purple. He only has purple things in his room. He just wants purple.
Do you know, I so bonded with, I love the scenes in the drugstore and but I just brought in, just before I read this book, I brought in a case of old Coca-Cola bottles to the store, and I said, I don't know what to do with these, because, there was like the little, this is for this hockey game, or like all these things, like, I don't care. So I had a special bond. So I think more people than you imagine. I mean, this sort of, we're all a little Uncle Rusty, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think so.
Yeah. Such a wonderful person. So I just want to mention that book is available. I put a link up. If you click on it now, you can purchase it. The screen will be up after we leave. There's copy, virtual and physical, available to borrow at the Whitefish Bay Public Library and probably through the Milwaukee County Library System, right, Sharon? Or wherever your library is, or you can buy it at whatever bookstore you want. And just tell them Boswell and the Whitefish Bay Library sent you there together.
Can I tell one more story?
Sure.
Of course.
Because it's like almost after the credits, you get like a little bit of extra thing of the movie.
Absolutely.
Uncle Rusty in real life was accidentally in an armed holdup. There was a holdup taking place, and the police were there, and people had guns out, and Uncle Rusty was shopping in the supermarket where the holdup was, and everything was very tense. And then out of the background, somebody just walked out holding like a teacher, and was like, "Howdy, how's it going? Just getting my 2-liter Coca-Cola." Just completely oblivious to the fact that there's this tense standoff. So I'm not sure if it actually, I think it may have even helped the situation, because everybody was just, they didn't know he was autistic. They just thought he was just like, yeah, just don't mind me, I'm just going to get this 2-liter of Coke. But he has such a disarming, innocent nature that he kind of spreads that, it's contagious. So there's a little extra Uncle Rusty story.
I think if I ever walk into a holdup, I might use that.
Don't mind me. I just need to get
Getting my Coke.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Success to you. We're looking forward to that book that you're working on now. Hope to see that in the future. Thank you from the Whitefish Bay Library and also from Boswell. And thanks to everybody for coming, and hope to see you at another event. And don't forget, we've got our first, I think it's our first so far, library event at the Whitefish Bay Library on October 5th. So, woohoo!
Oh, in person.
In person. We had one scheduled and it got canceled. So, easy come. Good. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Simon.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.